Our next session really comes back to this idea of interventions and what that entails, and to give perhaps a little bit clearer picture of what that involves. And it's our same wonderful participants in our earlier session. So without further ado, compassion cultivation training.
So I thought I would take the liberty of beginning with a brief meditation, even though we're not scheduled. Okay, yay! Somebody, two people like that idea?
Go for it.
Okay. So once again, I invite you to find a posture, whatever that might be, doesn't matter, standing, sitting, lying, that feels most amenable to you, to dropping into stillness and into the present moment. And beginning with a little vagal stimulation with 3 deep and diaphragmatic breaths. And after the 3rd exhalation, once again allowing the breath to find its own natural rhythm. And to take a moment or two to allow yourself to be breathed into existence. To surrender into the ongoing, awesome reality of this mind and body we've been thinking about and talking about. And to sit here and with no particular effort at all on your part, this amazing experience of being a human being just happens. I'd like to share with you a visualization that we use in the compassion cultivation training as a way of working with intention. So we'll be bringing in a bit of a guided visualization into the meditation practice. And I just want to assure you that, like all of these practices, there's never really a right or wrong answer. There's just what arises for you in the moment. And some people are more visual, some are more sensory, auditory. So just let the experience unfold however it will for you. So imagine that you're out in a beautiful field or pasture. So it might be a meadow of flowers here in Telluride, or any other place that comes to mind. And lying down on your back on a blanket, with a sun that warms but doesn't harm you, feeling at ease, soothed by the natural beauty that surrounds you. Imagine opening your eyes and looking up at the sky, taking in the vastness of it, its unlimited nature. And then reflect on the following 3 questions, just being willing to be surprised by what might come up. And remember that you'll be answering these questions in the privacy of your own heart and mind. You don't need to share them with anyone. So letting the possibilities be as vast as the sky above you. If anything were possible, anything at all, what would you really love to receive in your lifetime? So in this private reflection, no need to worry about grandiosity or shame or modesty or rationality. What would you truly love to receive? Whether material, spiritual, intellectual, doesn't matter. If anything were possible, how would you love to grow and develop as a human being? What would you love to see happen in your own trajectory of flourishing? And again, letting your imagination soar. If anything were possible, what would you really love to offer to the world? And coming back to the breath, to the experience of your body sitting or standing here. The physical, emotional reality that you experience. And closing by extending the wish that all beings might find the possibility for fulfillment, for the deepest and fullest expression of their true nature. So now I'd like to shift gears a little bit. By opening the windows, we brought in some of the life outside. Hope that's okay. We can go back and be our cocoon world again. It was hard to decide what exercise to share with you from the CCT training. And the decision kind of evolved, partly in the spirit of wanting to open up the conversation to ways to cultivate compassion that are not based on meditation, Buddhism, contemplation. So I wanted to share an exercise with you that we do in CCT. Maybe I'll stand. Everybody should have a needs inventory that Wendy and I passed out. This is from, how many people are not familiar, with nonviolent communication? Raise your hand if you have not encountered it before. Wow. Oh. Once again, if you have not encountered it, okay, so quite a few people. Okay, so Marshall Rosenberg is a psychologist who studied with Carl Rogers. A lot of you may know the great humanist psychologist who was really interested in empathic listening and reflection. And Marshall Rosenberg developed something called both compassionate communication and nonviolent communication. It's quite big. There's a whole lot to it. We only do an exercise on one piece of it in CCT, and that's what I want to share with you. And if there's more time tomorrow in a panel that we're doing, I might talk a little bit more about NVC. Something that struck me, I was just in Berlin at a meeting for a compassion book a number of us have written for, that also I may talk about later, but some NVC people contributed a chapter, and one of them was saying to me, I think of NVC as language-based compassion. And I thought that's really interesting, language-based compassion. And we were talking about the power of language and the power of naming things accurately, which came up, I think, earlier with Emiliana's accurate empathy. There's a lot of power in words and the accurate naming of what's here and now. And a lot of mindfulness practice, many of the techniques have to do with accurately naming. There's also power with language in terms of closing down the heart. You know, when there's name calling, when there's cruel speech, language has a lot of power to create, anger, fear, resentment, sadness, hurt, etc., right? So Marshall, Tim and I were talking about this over lunch. Marshall takes a very radical view, and I love it. It's so radical. And he says basically that no judgments are true, none of them, that everybody can get their needs met, that it's not a zero-sum game. And this, in a sense, points back to one of the questions that came up earlier about, is it selfish if I feel happy when I do for you? It's pretty blurry, Maybe it's more mutual, that we can all get our needs met. Again, maybe it's not an either-or proposition. It's just a kind of blurry proposition, that there is, as Rumi says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. It's there. And in that field, there's reciprocity, and there's the possibility that actually everybody can get their needs met. So the piece that we were interested in, that we kind of pulled out of this very rich work of Marshall's, is the whole idea of listening for the needs that are behind the words. Marshall said something, one of the many things he said that has informed my life and just lives in my mind was, all unskillful behavior, all of it, can be understood as a tragic expression of unmet needs. All of it. And the poignancy of that, I could cry actually thinking about it. I'm thinking about my mother, who is pretty narcissistic and prickly, and how she needed so much to be loved and respected and went about it in all the wrong ways. And even, some of the really cruel and violent behavior that we see is an expression of an unmet need. And when that's understood, the possibility for compassion just really expands. So there's a lot of power in imagining what the needs are behind the words. Marshall has done work all over the world, you know, in Rwanda, in Israel, and with gang violence, and in all sorts of settings. And he talks about how people will call him names, and he just doesn't even hear it. He listens to the need behind the words. One of my cancer groups, I remember there was this guy, and I could tell that he had a really good heart, but what came out of his mouth was very alienating for everybody in the room. It's like, no, you can't eat that. You're going to die. You know, you can't eat this and this, and everybody's got to do this, and that's really stupid, and why haven't you gotten a second? But he cared. And so I would ask him if it was okay if I translated for him. And I would kind of translate into Marshall speak. And he'd be so relieved, and everybody would be so relieved. And is it true? Are you saying that you really care about so-and-so? And that's what you're really worried about her and whether she's going to be okay? Yes, I'm really worried about her. And then this person who's been told all this stuff that really made her shut down just hears that he actually really cares about her. Or anyway, does that give you a flavor for it? I just want to do a brief introduction for the language of needs.
Quick question for clarification.
Yes.
The statement, everyone can get their needs met.
Yes.
Is this referring to a circumstance where a person could be in front of someone who might be able to meet their needs? And it makes me think of homeless children in India and these malnourished and impoverished.
Right.
The poorest of the poor. When you say they can get their needs met, exactly what is the context in which this assertion is being made? Does it mean if we scoop them up and be Mother Teresa and bring them to here, to you, you can meet their needs?
Yeah.
As opposed to the world absent somebody scooping them up.
Yeah. Well, I feel a little, that makes me aware of my limitations being a kind of spokesperson for NVC. So I'll make a stab at it, but it may not be the Marshall answer. And my stab is just that the view of zero-sum game makes us more attached and greedy and protective of what we have. And the view of there's enough food and there's enough stuff for everybody opens up the possibility of sharing more greatly. So kind of from a broader philosophical perspective, I think most people will say there is enough food on the planet.
I think it's been demonstrated.
Yeah, there's enough to go around. So one way of getting there is actually believing that by giving to you, I'll still be okay. So in that sense, we can all have our needs met. And not only will I be okay, Marshall will assert, and this kind of came up earlier too, that in a way, nothing makes me happier than contributing to making life wonderful. That's one of his assertions, that happiness, that's a huge source of happiness. If I can contribute to life being wonderful, that will make me very happy. So I'm sure there's more to the answer than that, but I'll just do my best with that.
Really small comment that I think can be really helpful. Marshall Rosenberg has tons of great stuff on YouTube.
Yeah, he
If you
does.
Google just his name on YouTube. It's so great to get his voice.
It's wonderful to get his voice, and he's just this amazing low-tech guy who has puppets and goes into prisons and Rwanda with the Tutsis and Hutus with a puppet of a giraffe and a puppet of, and his guitar. And, he could be a brand and he's not. So I really admire the guy. So I'd like to share with you an exercise that we do in CCT to help identify needs. I just want to see how I'm doing at the time. So I'm going to share something that's kind of embarrassing for me that I think you can relate to, where we ask people to share something where you did not behave so well. And then looking at this list of needs, see if you can imagine what my needs were. And then we'll break up into small groups and do a brief exercise with it. So I was going to present at a Mind and Life meeting on education. And I had a really terrible day going up to that, and all sorts of things went wrong and fell through, and I was really tired and really cranky, and got on a plane, and all I remember is that somehow the woman in front of me just wouldn't move her bag, and I had no place to put my bag, and I was really pissed off, and I said something not very nice to her. And I looked up, and there was Jimpa on the plane with me. And I'd never met him before. And I had just said, you know, whatever I said to her, I can't even remember, but God damn it, you know, can't you, whatever. And there's Jimpa smiling at me. I thought, oh my God. And he was going to the same meeting, you know, that I was presenting at. So I was, you know, mortified. And he called me out at that meeting. He said, he had to leave early. He wanted to talk to me, and I thought, he's going to say, like, you can't teach because I saw you do that, and you're not allowed to ever teach again. You know, and he said, I have this program on compassion at Stanford. You want to talk? You want to help with it? I said, okay. He's very forgiving. So what do you think my need was when I was on the plane and yelling at the woman? What do you think I was needing? There was a need that was driving that behavior.
Autonomy.
Support. Peace. Consideration. Yep. And ease. I was needing ease. Right? I wanted something to be easy. The day had been so damn hard. I wanted one thing to be easy. This was supposed to be, you know. So you get a sense of this? So what I'd like to do is just take about 5 minutes, break up into groups of 4, have one brave soul be willing to share something you did where you yelled at somebody or did something that was less than perfect, and have the other guys guess from the list what your needs were. Okay? So go ahead and turn to 3 or 4 people who are close to you. We'll have just 5 minutes for this. I think about it all the time.
She just shared a story about Mahima often shares about her mom, and it was a very similar.
So thank you very much for being willing to engage with this. I really don't have more time. I want to make sure that everybody has more time. You know, in CCT, we would never do an exercise like this and not process it as a group. And so I feel a little irresponsible not doing that, but I feel more responsible to the schedule and to my colleagues. So thank you, and if you have questions or want to check back in with me, I'd love to refer you to Marshall Rosenberg on YouTube for the answer.
If you recall from the cognitively based compassion training, we start with mindfulness, kind of pure attention training. The first week simply on the breath as an object of attention, and the second week expanding that sense of, that skill, that attention skill, to paying attention to the activity of one's own mind. So thoughts, images, feelings. So that's what for those who are new to that type of meditation, that's what that would entail, sitting quietly, alertly, and simply observing the activity of the mind, what comes up. So that's the first 2 weeks. And then we move into what I guess we consider the more compassion training portion, which includes, I'm going to do it. Let's just do it. So this would be an initial kind of meditative, contemplative exercise. It's going to be a guided visualization. So if you would all return to your favorite posture. Close your eyes or keep them slightly open if you like. I'll use the bell. So make yourself comfortable and find the posture that allows you to feel both relaxed and alert. Right? So this isn't relaxation to fall asleep. And usually we recommend not letting the back slump against the back of the chair. If you can come forward to the edge of the chair, that usually helps. Keeping the feet flat on the ground. Head slightly tilted down. And then one thing that's nice is to imagine yourself grounded. If you feel a sense of gravity pulling you into the seat, pushing back up, supporting you. And also at the same time feel a kind of lifting through the back of the neck, the center of the crown of the head, lifting upward. Gives that ability to be alert while relaxed. And just take a few deep breaths. Now, we're going to bring our attention to an experience that's happened to you in the last, say, couple of weeks that was not very pleasant. That was a negative experience, something that made you angry or frustrated. Perhaps you felt disrespected or left out. So take a moment to kind of find the right experience. And I'm just going to ask you to bring your attention to that and recall it. So don't pick something that's just the worst thing ever. Right. Frustrating, disappointing. And imagine being in the place where you experienced that. Imagine the people who were there, if there were people there. If it helps to focus on the visuals of what you can see around you, or the feeling of where you're sitting, the temperature of the air. The sounds. Try to put yourself in that experience. Now, while you're there, turn your attention to sensations in your body right now. So you might notice the expression on your face, the way your brow feels or your corners of your mouth, any tension or sensations in the limbs. Quality of your breath. Perhaps even your heartbeat or other internal sensations, the feelings in the gut or the chest. And now we're going to let go of that object of attention. And everyone take a couple of big breaths. So breathe in and breathe out. You bring your attention back to your breath. In and out. And now we're going to do one more thing, which is to focus on a positive experience from the last few weeks. So take a moment to find one, something where you feel supported, connected with others, respected, maybe even admired or loved. Something where you truly feel connected with other people or with your purpose. Specific time and place, if you can. And again, visualize that place. Visualize the space of that experience. The looks on the faces of people involved. The feelings. Sounds. That sense of connection. And while you're in this space, notice the sensations in your body at this moment. The expression on your face, quality of your breath. Any sensations in your legs or arms, your neck, or your back. And again, any internal sensations from inside the torso or heartbeat. And now we'll let go of our attention on that experience and again take a big breath together. So breathe in and breathe out. Open your eyes when you're ready to do that. Does anyone notice any differences between those two experiences that they're willing to talk about? The reason we do this, I'm trying to do it a somewhat abbreviated version, so I want to stay on task. So one question is, if you could choose, right, which way to feel, assuming you did feel a difference, which one would you choose to feel would be a question to consider, right? Obviously, we'd want to feel better. We want to feel more relaxed and less tense. And then the question, this is why we do this exercise, then we ask the question, well, we make the point that you have actually just chosen. Right? This was an entirely voluntary exercise of your own imagination. right? You weren't actually experiencing these things at this time, right? And yet our mind is able to construct them, reconstruct them, and cause very real affective states within our body and mind. So this is meant to lead to an insight that we have through our attention and training our attention, we can. So this is just one of the things that starts, and then once you realize that, it feeds into the motivation to practice this further, right? And it comes down to attention and choice of attention.
Cool, thanks. It's really lovely, and I think it can prove an opportunity to see how we can focus on similar domains in different ways. So I so appreciated these two practices, and I think we're going to find some overlap with what we're going to do. My hope for this practice is twofold. One is to offer you an experiential process, and two is to kind of show the methods behind that afterwards. So we will go through this process together, which ideally would be 2 hours. We're going to do it over 20 minutes. So it's just kind of like a taste. And after we've kind of completed the best we can this brief taste, I'd like to share with you what are the operating mechanisms behind what we've done here. So making contact with our affect regulation systems and learning how we transition from threat, drive, onto soothing. So we've all been introduced to the 3 circles very, very briefly. We got the threat here at the bottom, which speaks to this sense of urgency, danger, risk, anxiety, disgust, aversion. We have this drive, go, 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 go system, which could ostensibly serve us well as backfire when it's get mixed with threat and we live our lives in this drive kind of oriented fashion. And then we have our soothing affiliative system, and I'll define it again in a moment, but for our purposes now, we will think about our soothing system as a system that holds a sense of safeness, a sense of contentment, and a sense of having this flow of kindness towards others, from others, and self-compassion towards myself. It could be a mix of all 3, it can be one of them, however it kind of shows up for you. So you have these handouts. All of you should have these handouts available to you. And if we had the 2 hours that I was alluding to in my fantasy reality, we would do a 10-15 minute awareness practice that essentially helps attune from an affective perspective, a somatic perspective, a cognitive perspective, and really help you make contact with each one of these 3 circles that are here. So imagine that we did it, because we wouldn't have enough time to cover everything if we did that practice, but in a perfect world, we will be doing that. So we will make this experiential contact in those ways also. So I gave you these handouts and I made these lines for you to write in. So I encourage you to keep this. And maybe later on today, if you feel, because of doing this work, if you feel like practicing a little bit on your own, and if you feel like journaling for yourself and kind of making contact in that way, in narrative form, that would be available to you. That's why I created that handout. And then now we're going to just kind of introduce the second side of that handout. And really, we're talking about this success story, kind of wondering, curious about how is it that you pulled it off. And I'm going to define it in the most general, crude way possible initially, and then give it specifics. I really like this idea of good vibe, and before we're done, I'll give it more specifics too. But really, we're trying to figure out how is it that you were able to transition from bad vibe to good vibe. How did you do it? I'm impressed. That's kind of the nutshell of the exercise. And then we're going to dive into some of the specifics of this exercise. So obviously we're going to do, as like it says, a dyadic exercise. You can do it with a new person or something you're comfortable with. Either way is fine. And let's just talk about phase 1. And you also have this in the handouts, but I want to walk you through that before we begin. So phase 1, we describe an experience, very important, that you feel comfortable sharing. We're not looking for the most terrible trauma that we've had in our lives here. That's not what we're after. But something that was challenging. We felt kind of stuck, either in your threat system or your drive system. And these 2 specifics, right? So when you share with your partner in the dyad, what has been the impact of that experience? What happened to you because of this? How has it made you feel? How has it made you think? How has it made you do? What does it make you behave, if you will. It's funny English, but that's how I roll sometimes. So what did it make you do? Because of going through that experience, right? So your feelings, your thoughts, your behaviors. And then the second piece, what ideas or habits or feelings or people have been supporting your being stuck in this space, supporting you being stuck in threat, supporting you being stuck in drive? What has been sustaining? What has been, in other words, what has been feeding the problem, if you will? So we're trying to kind of externalize in the same way we think sometimes you are not your thoughts. Well, in another way, you are not your problems. We harbor our problems, right? So we want to, for a moment, just externalize our problem, be able to look at it and kind of see how has this been impacting me? What has been sustaining? What has been giving life to this problem? So that is the first phase. And then the second phase that, again, you have on your handout. So, describe a time where you were able to resist the pressures of threat and drive. Describe a time where you were able to successfully transition into your safeness and soothing system. So you're in threat and drive. It's impacting you in those ways. That's phase one. And then how are you able to move from that space onto another space? The space of soothing, the space of good vibe. Call it what you will. We can define it together later if you wish. So operationally, what we're asking, how did you transition from this difficult place to a place where you felt, again, soothing, contentment, kindness towards others, receiving it from others towards yourself, or any mix of those, right? So that's kind of what we're after. And then the question that you will be sharing with your partner is, how are you able to make this work? How did you pull it off? I'm impressed. Where did you get the strength to do this? Listening, right? Listening is important. There's this deal about how to listen, don't say anything, say a little bit. So ultimately, your listener, your partner, is trying to take in and create a space for you to share. You can be silent for the most part, but you don't have to be completely silent. So if there's an urging OMG or WTF, then do it. That's fine. Just be with the person. Be attentive with the person and hold the space where they can share with you, right? And then the last piece is, what coping resources did you draw upon in order to arrive in your safeness and soothing space? So this one is where you actually write down some stuff. So when you share with your person, you share what coping resources you've been able to draw upon, and you share that, and you write it down. And once you're done sharing with your partner in the dyad, the coping that has been helpful to you, your partner is invited to actually opine and offer more coping skills. These are more things that could have been helpful to you. So I'm trying to help create this kind of resource list, a personal resource list. These are ways in which I can deal with being stuck in threat and drive in these difficult places. So resources, it might feel confusing. So let me say resources can be things like words, somatic experiences, emotions, visual, interpersonal experience, artistic expressions. I just used a lot of words, and I don't think it makes perfect sense, which is why I have the next slide to help crystallize what I'm referring to. The next slide is a list that I got from Dr. Ronnie Berger, who does this scoping stuff with different folks, and I'll say more about that later on. And the idea is that we have different categories of coping capacities. We have motor, doing things. We have sensation. It could be mindfulness or breathing or focusing on compassion. Beliefs, our narratives about the world, how I was able to shift into another narrative. Emotional experiences, social experiences, imagination, creativity. Maybe I can imagine myself connecting with one of these three directions of compassion. And cognitions, right? We love CBT and all this therapy stuff. So how was I able to reframe my cognitions in a way that was helpful to me? So now we're going to jump into this. And you're not going to see this quite now. Because, well, you're seeing it now. Because I want to help you orient with time. So the exercise is these are 5-minute cycles. So when we start with this phase 1 and phase 2, and we do that for approximately 2.5 minutes. And 2.5 minutes from now, after we've begun, I will shift over to the coping slide so that you can orient in those ways, and that would also be your cue. Okay, it's time for me to just shift over to talking about my coping capacities at this particular moment. So again, ideally we would have a lot more time to do this, but I want you to have a taste of this kind of experience. So does this feel sufficiently clear? And we have the handouts as well, please. Here's one. Sure, I could use it. Can we commence? Does that sound sufficiently clear? So everybody got a partner? Diet up? All right. So this is where I push my button. So let's start. Okay, so we're now at 2.5 minutes, and we start talking about our coping capacities and what we've done and get feedback. And please make sure to write it down so that you have it with you afterwards. Okay, so now the first cycle is complete, and we can just kind of switch, and now the listener will be a teller and vice versa. Okay, so 2.5 minutes into the second. So now we're going to just switch over to talking about our coping and making sure to write everything down. So we have that resource list. Okay, so that completes our second cycle. And I'm sure that you're just beginning to discuss and share because more people are still talking. And it makes perfect sense because this is an interesting thing, right? But again, unfortunately, now we're just having a little taste. We can't really dive in depth into that experience. And we're just going to take 5 more minutes. And we're going to spend maybe 2 minutes doing a brief and insufficient process and then just describing what we actually did here. So I want to just ask you, and obviously not everybody will get to talk, but my request is whenever a question comes up, please ask yourselves the question. Even if you don't share it, ask yourself what was it like. So what was it like to share, the teller, when you were sharing? Anybody want to say something about that?
It really activated all the threat that I felt at the time. I started feeling tightness in my chest, and I was getting really kind of worked up just talking about it, even though it was a long time ago that this thing happened.
Sure. So that was an invitation to visit that space, and then we done the process. It made it been more refined. Anyone else?
To me, it was kind of an uplifting journey.
Okay.
Because he had a happy ending.
Yeah. Happy endings are usually good. And again, this is briefer than I would like for it to be, but something from the listeners. What was it like to just kind of listen and take it in? Or if you wish, what was it like to offer additional coping resources? What do you think? What was that like for you to be in that space of listening? Interesting question. It will make sense in a couple of minutes. What would it feel like if we had plenty of time and each person would select their absolute favorite coping resource? And you would spend time making an art piece or writing it down in beautiful text. And all of the walls around here in this wall would be covered with pictures and art of our coping resources. What would that be like? Abstract. Motivational. What kind of vibe might that induce, in your opinion?
Southern California.
Yeah, people are doing Southern California. Yeah.
Northern California.
Sure. So I'm going to suggest, just because the brevity of time, is that generally speaking, from my perspective, our goal is awareness through creating this kind of collective and supportive good vibe and spirit of having each other's backs. For me, that is really how I think about compassion. There's lots of research. Some of it I don't understand. It's too complicated for me. But I think that when we create a space where people have each other's back and support each other, that is where compassion emerges in its most beautiful form. And that's at least kind of how I understand it. Now I'm going to show you again that I can speak very quickly because we're done with the experiential part. And I want to tell you what we did. References, what do we do? By the way, this exercise, I totally made it up. So the idea is that there's the Gilbert 3 circles. It's a beautiful model. I think that everybody should be aware of Gilbert's 3 circles. The beauty of his approach is how comprehensive, coherent, flexible, and modular it can be. And the idea is a principle-driven approach. We don't follow protocols, and we're not loosey-goosey. One is here, one is here. We try to be in the middle. We follow principles. What principles do we follow? If we had time, we would have started out with this deeper meditation awareness process. Next time, maybe we will. I spoke about good vibe. In therapy, we speak about the alliance, right? The connection between the therapist and the client. In my opinion, it doesn't have to be between therapist and client. If we can engage communities and create that kind of good vibe between individuals and get them to have each other's backs, I think of my grandma often where she said we need to give people fishing rods. We need to teach people how to fish. Giving fish, less helpful in my opinion. So interpersonal sharing, empathic listening, support, problem solving, all these things are good by themselves, but they give rise to the following interventions. So in my opinion, you can't have a compassion conference in the mountain without at least one angry, dead French philosopher. So the axis around which the whole thing revolved is essentially Michel Foucault's thinking And Michael White, great therapist out of Australia, unfortunately passed away, I think one of the greatest thinkers of psychotherapy. He has this thing called Externalizing the Problem. I recommend Googling it. It is the essence of being a rebel. It is the essence of being radical in this world, and it's actually why I went into this field. But so the deal is that we have a problem, and that problem was created by the oppression of societal forces. So we externalize our problem. We try to understand, how is it impacting us? What is this doing to me? And I'm getting a little bit unhappy with this situation right here, right? And then I'm asking you, tell me about a unique outcome. Tell me about a time where you're able to pull out of that problem and arrive somewhere good. And then let's amplify that unique outcome. So like many people, Foucault has been criticized a lot for being too vague and not having enough specificity. He likes to criticize. So taking his thinking, adding specificity is the coping component. The coping I learned about from Dr. Ronnie Berger. So this coping exercises that I've shared with you, over 60,000 children all over the world engage with a child-appropriate version of that exercise. And the extension of that is that they create artwork, and each coping resource actually gets drawn. It becomes an illustration. There's over 60,000 kids all over the world that have classrooms or did have classrooms that are covered with these coping resources. And the agenda is to create a climate of support, a climate of having each other's backs, which is, from my perspective, that is really the agenda. And what I've attempted to share with you here is that we can have exercises that are very structured, but also tailored to each person's experience. And I think that, the back end looks like it's got a lot of stuff going on, but we're actually just going through the process. I think that lots of people can share this with lots of people. You don't have to go to school for a million years to go through a pretty simple exercise like that. And I think that our hope should be creating simple exercises that create meaningful and profound processes. And my hope here is to share as much as I could. And just one last comment. So the handout I've given you earlier this morning has an empathy skills training exercise, which we will not have time to go over. We used it last year in London. We went with Dr. Doty. But I just wanted you to have it so you have more skills and more resources. So I really appreciated sharing. Tomorrow, because of time, I will start precisely at 8:30 just so we can catch everything that we can. And yeah, thank you so much. It's been fun.
Do you take questions?
Sure.
What is the evidence of changes in these 60,000 kids?
So we don't have data on all the 60,000 kids, but we have many publications. So post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, somatic complaints as they relate to post-traumatic stress. The most exciting finding is recent, and it's a seed. I'm not going to say it's the cure, but the idea is erase stress pro-social. How do you have pro-social components? So as you know, the Jews and the Arabs, they love each other. So with the study that Ronnie has led in the south of Israel with Jewish and Arab kids was an integration of stress reduction mixed with attention to in-group, out-group tension. And there was
Mario involved?
Mario is involved. Yeah, I'll talk to you more about it later. So he's involved with actually several projects where, yeah. So the idea was, can you reduce stress while you reduce prejudice? Or if I translate it to another perspective, can you reduce stress while teaching shared humanity? And the data showed that, yeah, you can reduce the prejudice amongst both the Jewish and the Arab children, and they were extraordinarily hateful, as I want to be cautious about using, but there's definitely high levels of prejudice on both sides. To say that this is fixing any huge problem, I would be overstating, but I think it's a seed that we want to grow and add more pro-social skills training for these children.